Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me here on HeartShift TV and my new program called The Tipping Point. So today I'd like to introduce this concept to you that has become actually quite familiar to me, particularly in the past year or so. And this may have happened for you as well. Now, the tipping point, what is it and what comes to mind when I say that? Well, for me, I have visions of being a child on a playground and on a toy or piece of playground equipment that I knew as a seesaw or a teeter-totter. Strange names, I know. But the concept was, of course, that there was this board that was placed upon a fulcrum. And the fulcrum, as you may remember, is the actual support for this length of board that on either end there would be a handle. And so in order to play on this equipment, you could try to play by yourself, but the truth was it really wasn't fun unless you had someone else on the other end of that board. Now, what's interesting is that this fulcrum was, of course, stationary. That didn't move. And what it enabled you to do was to go back and forth, okay, pushing off with your legs and making that seesaw go up or down, dependent on the weight of one end or another. So, of course, if you were with another child or a parent who weighed more than you, chances are they would love to torture you by staying put on the ground, their legs extended out, and you just sitting up in the sky, not being able to even move an inch because the weight on the other end was actually weighing you down. If you were with someone who was playing more friendly, kinder, regardless of their weight, they would try to keep things balanced. And if you had an opportunity, of course, for your feet to hit the ground, then you could try to push them up, propel them up off the ground and elevate them. If you had a child who was of your own weight, this was the most fun, of course, because you could just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but you could still play games. And that was, of course, the purpose of the fulcrum. The fulcrum, being this support surface, was there to make sure that not only were you safe and that the toy itself was in good condition, but that it would support you. And that support, of course, would be whether you were up in the air or on the ground. So what it also does is that it provides you the opportunity to pivot. You can choose when you're on that toy, because of the fulcrum, whether or not you want to stay in a balanced exchange with your friend or not. So, as I said earlier, it really depends on how the weight is distributed on that seesaw or that teeter-totter. That depends on how much you enjoy the game. So what I'd like to talk about in this programming is the tipping point. Actually, your tipping point. Because each and every one of us is presented with this opportunity to make a pivot every single day. In fact, in the spiritual world that I'm connected to, we say it happens every nanosecond. That you choose to create the pivot. In other words, to actually create something brand new. Now, in relation to what we are experiencing in this world, we can look at the playground of a child and start to understand how many lessons really we learned on that playground. And I'm using again this example of the seesaw, the teeter-totter. Number one was it never really paid to choose somebody who weighed more than you. It was never a fair or fun exchange on that seesaw, unless they were willing to maybe just drape one leg over it. In other words, they had to be willing to play the game for the sake of the game. But the other thing is that there was something really interesting that happened when you were in a balanced or neutral position. And every partnership on that piece of equipment at one point or another would try to create that balance, would try to create that neutrality. And inevitably, of course, one side would dip, the other side would go up, that side would dip, the other side would go up, alternating. But what was really interesting was how it felt to be in the neutral or balanced state. It was cool initially. But then, if you recall, we would get antsy. We actually would almost get goaded to make a move, to create some new momentum. Now, what I see happening is that there is an awful lot of foul play taking place, right? In particular, where it would seem that there's one side, one player on that side of the seesaw that keeps trying to muscle its way in. But what I'm also seeing is that at every opportunity that this control occurs, there is a reaction from the lighter side of that seesaw. And so what often happens when there's a response, there is a regaining of a sense of control. No matter how small it is, no matter how slight, we know that eventually that other one on the other end of the seesaw is going to get tired of holding it down. And it actually may get bored on the playground altogether. It may run off to torture another child. But the truth of the matter is that what I recall is that whenever I was that child who was elevated up on the other side of the seesaw, it was really an opportunity for me to see things differently. Now, of course, there was always the possibility that that heavier person on the other side would just randomly decide to get up and I might come crashing down to the ground. But because I knew that that would happen, I knew to keep my legs ready in anticipation. But while I was up there, everything seemed different. In addition, I found that I could actually enjoy part of it because it gave me the time to create, to think about things differently. All the while, of course, that I was making my own moves. And so I just want to leave that with you. Maybe some food for thought, something to munch on during the day. What is your tipping point? And what part are you playing on the playground? Well, that's it for today. I'll be back to talk about more aspects of this tipping point, but of course, specifically yours, because that's where it all starts. So let's all have a moment of gratitude for the fulcrum, for how it supports us in making these decisions. Do we want to play nice? Do we want to just enjoy the view if something's trying to hold us down? Or do we want to answer the call because the balancing or the neutrality is really asking us for a decision? Okay, I'll see you soon. In the meantime, have a good munch.